In the heart of a war-torn land, where the echoes of gunfire mingled with the cries of the wounded, there stood a soldier named Marcus. He was not just any soldier. He was a man of principles, a steadfast believer in duty and honor. Yet, beneath the surface of his rugged exterior lay a tempest of conflicting emotion, a struggle that would ultimately lead him down a path he never intended to tread. Marcus had always been the type to follow the rules. Raised in a small town, he had learned the value of hard work and integrity from his father, a veteran of a previous conflict. The stories of bravery and sacrifice had shaped his youth, instilling in him a deep respect for the uniform he now wore. He believed in fighting for his country, in protecting the innocent, and in standing firm against tyranny. But war has a way of warping ideals, of blurring the lines between right and wrong. It was during a particularly grueling deployment that Marcus found himself at a crossroads. The heat of the desert sun bore down mercilessly, and the days bled into nights filled with the sounds of distant explosions. His unit was tasked with a critical mission: to gather intelligence on a suspected enemy stronghold. The stakes were high, and the pressure weighed heavily on Marcus's shoulders. He was the squad leader, and the lives of his men depended on his decisions. As the days wore on, Marcus became increasingly aware of the toll that the war was taking on his comrades. The fear, the fatigue, and the uncertainty gnawed at their spirits. He could see the cracks forming in their resolve, and it pained him to witness the erosion of their once unbreakable bond. In a moment of desperation, he made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. One night, while the rest of his squad slept, Marcus ventured out to scout the perimeter. It was then he stumbled upon a small village, its inhabitants unaware of the conflict raging just beyond their borders. In the dim light of a flickering lantern, he saw families huddled together, their faces etched with worry. They were not the enemy. They were victims of a war they did not choose. In that moment, Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to protect them, to shield them from the chaos that threatened to engulf their lives. In a lapse of judgment, he made a decision that would forever alter his fate. He returned to his unit with a fabricated report, one that claimed the village was harboring enemy combatants. The lie rolled off his tongue with ease, a betrayal of everything he once stood for. He painted a picture of danger, of imminent threat, and his squad, desperate for a sense of purpose, rallied behind him. They prepared for an assault, convinced they were acting in the name of justice. As the sun rose the next day, casting a golden hue over the landscape, Marcus led his men into the village. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of his deception pressed heavily on his conscience. He could see the fear in the eyes of the villagers as they fled, their screams echoing in his ears. But he pushed forward, driven by the adrenaline of the moment, convinced that he was doing the right thing. The assault was swift and brutal. Buildings crumbled under the weight of gunfire, and the cries of the innocent filled the air. In the chaos, Marcus lost sight of his original intentions. The line between hero and villain blurred until he could no longer recognize himself. When the dust settled, he stood amidst the ruins, surrounded by the remnants of lives shattered by his own hand. In the days that followed, the guilt consumed him. The faces of the villagers haunted his dreams, their expressions a constant reminder of his betrayal. He had sacrificed his integrity for a fleeting sense of control, and the consequences were dire. The mission had been a failure, not because of enemy resistance, but because of the devastation wrought by his own deceit. The camaraderie he once cherished among his men began to fracture as whispers of doubt spread. They questioned his leadership, his judgment, and Marcus felt the weight of their distrust like a noose tightening around his neck. As the war dragged on, Marcus found himself trapped in a cycle of remorse and denial. He tried to bury the truth beneath layers of bravado, to convince himself that he had acted for the greater good. But the reality was inescapable. He had betrayed not only the villagers, but also the very principles that had guided him throughout his life. He had become a soldier who cheated, not just the enemy, but himself. It was during a quiet moment, far from the sounds of battle, that Marcus finally confronted his demons. Sitting alone in the darkness, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his actions. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered apologies to the villagers he had wronged, to the comrades who had placed their trust in him. He realized that redemption would not come easily. It would require a reckoning, a willingness to face the consequences of his choices. In the months that followed, Marcus made it his mission to seek forgiveness. He began to advocate for the very people he had once harmed, working to rebuild the village he had destroyed. He volunteered for humanitarian efforts, using his experience to help those in need. It was a small step toward atonement, but it was a start. He understood that true bravery lay not in the battlefield, but in the courage to confront one's own failures. As the war came to an end, Marcus returned home, forever changed by his experiences. He carried the weight of his past with him, a reminder of the fine line between duty and morality. He had been a soldier who cheated, but he was determined to become a man who would strive for redemption, one act of kindness at a time. In the end, it was not the battles fought on distant shores that defined him, but the battles waged within his own heart.